Hey, everybody, and welcome to the show from Common Room Radio. I'm Sarah K. Bazant, and look, up in the sky, it's a bird.
I'm Alistair Stevens, and no, it's clearly a plane.
I'm Vinton Bain, and no, it's Superman!
Yay!
Yay! And welcome to Excelsior. This week we are doing Superman for All Seasons, written by Jeph Loeb with art by Tim Sale. And this is pretty good. It's only 4 issues.
Yeah.
So it's pretty short. So this might be a shorter episode. We'll see what we do, I guess.
Yeah. That might be misleading because it's 4 larger issues.
Yeah.
It was 4 volumes, which were like really mini graphic novels.
Okay, I see.
So you might have noticed that when you were reading this, these were a lot longer than regular issues of comic books.
I really didn't. I was so entranced by the watercolor backgrounds.
Also, there's a lot of large spreads, so it does move pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
There are more beautiful 2-page splash pages in this book than I've seen in a long, long while. It's gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
They're really,
gorgeous.
really good.
As you said, though, this is a 4-issue miniseries. It was released between September and December of 1998, made hot off the heels of the previous success of Tim Sale and Jeph Loeb, Batman: The Long Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
And as the Batman story dealt with holidays as the theme, this story deals with seasons.
It does. It's got a nice little 4-act structure.
Yeah.
Here, and strong narration in each of the issues, which I really adored.
So before we move on too much further, let's go ahead and flip the VHS.
Yay.
Superman springs forth from Smallville, gets all summed up in Metropolis soon after experiencing a great fall, but eventually he makes his comeback and winters. Did you get that this story has a season theme? Because we're not going to let you forget it. Wonder, as this oafish, superpowered country boy comes to the big city and bullies a poor businessman who built Metropolis from his own sweat and tears, and anyone who says any different is hashtag fake news. It's Superman for all seasons.
Very good.
That was very good. Thank you.
As we said at the top of the show, this was created by Jeph Loeb, the writer. Jeph Loeb is a film and television writer, producer, and comic book writer. He was the producer-writer on the TV series Smallville, which this comic book worked as the catalyst for. This is how they kind of pitched that show in a lot of ways.
Oh.
And he was also the producer-writer on Lost. On some of those episodes, I don't think the whole show.
No, certainly not. But he contributed as many comics writers did. He contributed to the arc of Lost,
And he was a writer and co-executive producer on the TV show Heroes. In 2010, Loeb became the executive vice president of Marvel Television, which most of you probably know his name from there. A 4-time Eisner Award winner and a 5-time Wizard Fan Award winner, Loeb's comic book work has appeared on the New York Times bestseller list and includes work on many major characters such as Marvel and DC characters and even Buffy the Vampire Slayer, of which he was the executive producer on the animated series, which never saw the light of the day.
Oh, that breaks my heart. That 3.5-minute pilot you can find on YouTube is so good.
It is so good. How different the world could have been
I
if we
know.
had 5 seasons of a Buffy animated series.
Why do we live in the darkest timeline, you guys?
That is a question that we're asking ourselves often.
Every day. Several times a day.
The artist on this book is Tim Sale. Tim Sale is a Eisner Award-winning comic artist. He won his Eisner in 1999 for Best Artist /Penciler/Inker or /Penciler/Inker Team, which is a very complicated category.
Wow, yeah, that's
Do
a
you
lot.
draw a comic? Because you might win this Eisner if you do.
The majority of Sale's comic work has been in collaboration with Jeph Loeb. Some of their work together includes Year One centered Batman, Legends of the Dark Knight, Halloween specials, Batman: The Long Halloween, Batman: Dark Victory, and Catwoman: When in Rome. At Marvel Comics, the team produced the so-called color books, such as Daredevil Yellow, Spider-Man Blue, Hulk Gray, and Captain America White. Sale also launched the Superman Confidential series with Darwin Cook in 2007. He also created art for the Heroes television show for Jeph Loeb. He did the art that was done by one of the characters who was a precog through art, and he also did all the lettering and fonts.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
if you don't
fun.
remember how good the comics art was in Heroes, go back and watch the first season of Heroes.
Just
That's
the
all
first
you ever
season.
need to watch.
Yeah.
Just the first season.
Nothing
is
else.
Good. Solid first season.
We should talk about that at some point.
It's great.
Yeah.
I watched it pretty recently, last year maybe, and it holds up. The first season really holds up. And there are honestly things
super
about the
into
second season that I kind of like too, yeah.
Bjarne Hansen is a Danish art director, painter, and colorist. He has worked on magazines, commercials, books, TV, and movies. Another notable DC comic he worked on was House of Secrets, nominated for Best Colors and the Eisner Award for Superman for All Seasons.
The coloring throughout this book is stunning.
It's so good.
Stunning.
It's really beautiful.
That one splash page of Luthor looking out at Superman, kind of hovering in the sky outside his tower.
Oh, that's not even my favorite one.
So good. That's not?
The sunset.
The sunset with Clark and Pa Kent out in the field. That's my favorite one. Yeah.
That's pretty special.
And notably in this comic, Richard Starkings does the letters, and he's actually a pretty famous letterer. He's a British font designer and comic book letterer, editor, and writer. He was one of the early pioneers of computer-based comic book lettering, founding Comic Craft, a studio which trains and employs letterers and designers and sells their digital font designs online at comicbookfonts.com.
That's neat.
Visited comicbookfonts.com
I think I have
in my
too.
real life.
Yeah.
Probably not hurting for money.
Early 90s, so it's like he really did pioneer that.
Wow.
So now let's move into a brief history on Superman. So Superman was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, most famously. I think most people know this. Jerry Siegel self-published a story in 1933 called The Reign of the Superman about a mad scientist villain. And soon after, Siegel and his friend Shuster, Joe Shuster, who illustrated the piece, revamped Superman into a good guy, closer to what we know now. And for several years, they unsuccessfully pitched their comic strip idea to newspapers, finally finding a place for their character in the 13-page story for Action Comics #1 in 1938, which would go on to become the most valuable comic book of all time, with one copy selling for $3.2 million at auction in 2014.
Wow.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Fun fact, those guys were the inspiration for the Michael Chabon novel Cavalier and Clay, which is a pretty good book, actually. I recommend it. Yeah, Chabon's really good.
Yeah. Siegel and Shuster earned fairly high salaries writing and illustrating Superman comics over the years, but they received no royalties, having signed away all rights to their character for $130, which is the equivalent of about $2,200 today.
Wow.
It's pretty well agreed upon that the comic book companies took advantage of creators in their early days, and Siegel and Shuster spent their whole lives in legal battles with DC that still resurface to this day with their heirs.
Wow.
That being said, there's actually a secret origins to Superman, which is something you just usually see in like fiction, but there's a real life secret origins possibly.
What is the real life secret origin of Superman?
So there's an author, Brad Meltzer, who is also a bit of a comic historian himself, and he was writing a biography and a history, and he came across this story of Jerry Siegel, the man who came up with Superman. The year before Superman was created, his father was shot and killed in the store that he runs by people that I guess they were just like, they were robbing it or something. There was some kind of event where they ran in, and supposedly his father had died from 2 gunshots to the chest. I guess later they found out that might not have been the case, that the shots missed and he had a heart attack. But as far as Siegel knew, his father had died from 2 shots to the chest. And a year later, he writes a story about this Superman who is bulletproof and super strong. And his first story is saving a man in his shop, bound and gagged from an armed assailant.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
This story gets a little bit deeper even, because if just looking at that, this kid wrote the man that he wished could have saved his father. But at the time, this brought about some newspapers talking about how there needed to be some vigilante justice to take care of all the violence that was going on in the streets at that time. And there was a man, I guess some kind of businessman or something, had signed the paper, wrote a statement saying that this should not happen. This was a bad use of resources. We shouldn't do this. And it was signed L. Luthor. And this is now thought to be the origin of Lex Luthor.
Wow.
Now, the creators themselves never mentioned this. Anytime they were asked about the origin of Superman, they said it just came to them one night in a dream and they used it to impress girls. They never mentioned any of this. No one ever knew this until I think it was close to like 20 years after they died that Meltzer was working on this and found this information out. And when you look at it, it's really true that when you look at the Superman story, this is clearly an inspiration from their own stories, coming from war-torn areas, Jewish immigrants. This is the story of Superman coming from Krypton being destroyed, losing their family, losing their loved ones, and having to try to find a home in this place that they don't fit in, and they never feel like they're quite at home.
Superman as the immigrant story, the quintessential American immigrant story, is kind of encoded into his character pretty much from page 1 of Action Comics #1. Yeah, and
it should be noted that when Superman was created, really his only 2 superhero attributes were that he could leap tall buildings, literally jump. He was super strong, and he was bulletproof. The other things came in later. So really this was just a character that was there to save this kid's father. As Meltzer himself puts it, America got Superman because a boy lost his father.
Oof.
pretty heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome though. Like I really like this, how personal this story gets, this secret history. It was really cool when I found it out.
That's so
geeked out so
neat.
hard on it.
Yeah. Wow.
Now the character, on the other hand, we're not going to go too deep into the story of Superman. What I do want to talk about is there's a difference between Marvel and DC methods of storytelling.
Okay, good. I'm here for this.
Marvel tries more to hold to a canon, like an actual record of history. DC, I often compare towards legends and myths.
Yeah.
There are many versions, each with a glimpse of the truth, but no actual canon. So there are many incarnations of these heroes and their stories with differences, but it's the heart of the story of the characters that matters. There's something great about that. As much as Marvel fights to keep canon in an ongoing world of fiction built with thousands of creators, it's impossible to fully do all the time.
Yeah.
I do admire them for it, and I do really love it. But DC makes it so much easier on themselves and the reader. You can take 5 different origins of Superman stories and give them to 5 different people, and they won't have all the same details, but most likely they'll know exactly who Superman is and be able to agree upon that.
Yeah.
And that's the point.
And that's why the origin stories of particularly the Trinity in DC are so archetypal. They're so straightforward because you get a one-line description and that's everything that you need. You don't even get that for Spider-Man. You know, Spider-Man is one of the most archetypal Marvel characters, and his origin story has to have 3 or 4 sentences because you have to fold in Uncle Ben and tragedy and selfishness and all of those things too. Superman's origin story has perhaps never been encapsulated better than in the first page of Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely's All-Star Superman, where there are 4 horizontal panels arrayed down the page and there are 8 words written on this page, and it's his entire origin story. The first panel is a glimpse of Krypton being torn apart and it just says doomed planet. The second panel has Superman's parents embracing as they look up to the stars and it says desperate scientists. Then you see Superman's pod floating among the wreckage of Krypton and it says last hope. And then you have a shot from Superman's POV of the Kents looking down into his pod with this expression of I don't know, compassion and joy and just good all-American homeliness, I suppose. And it just says kindly couple. That's Superman's origin. Doomed planet, desperate scientists, last hope, kindly couple.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And how amazing that I can celebrate Grant Morrison for writing 8 words on a page.
So I would ask you guys when you first encountered Superman, but I think most of us probably encountered him so young that for me personally, I can't remember. I've just always grown up with Superman. I had Superman coloring books. I watched the old 70s movie. The cartoon, of course, came a little later, but I remember growing up with it, and I always had Superman comics. It's just something embedded in me. I'm not a huge Superman fan. Never have I been. This book I really do love, though. But it's always been hard for me to actually break into the character of Superman. And a lot of that is just this idea of that I kind of buy into, and I will admit to it, even though I can look at it and say it's kind of a bad idea, that Superman's unrelatable. He's unopposable, godlike. He's not really what I look for in a comic book.
Right.
You know, but this actually shows him as something different. It gives him more humanity in the story.
Absolutely does.
And it really shows you how he's this beacon of hope whose tender heart guides him and inspires others, making him this true iconic hero. And I can really appreciate the iconicness of Superman without being a huge Superman fan myself.
Yeah. I think that my story is actually very similar. I mean, I think probably my earliest introduction to Superman was probably like the Justice League cartoon that would come on in like, the late 90s or whatever. But before, I mean, like, I don't know. I can't possibly remember a time in my life when I didn't know who Superman was. I mean, like, everybody knows who Superman is. Superman and Mickey Mouse, right? Like,
that's exactly it.
Yeah. Everyone on the planet knows who these two people are.
I'm a little older than you guys, and I can remember a time when Superman was the superhero that everybody knew. Prior to like the 1989 Tim Burton Batman movie, I don't even think that Batman had kind of hit mainstream public consciousness in the way that Superman had. But you're absolutely right. I can't think of a time when I didn't know about Superman. I remember watching the Christopher Reeve movies when I was growing up and loving them, even though they are wildly inconsistent. There are some really bad movies in that run, you guys. Though the first movie, I think, still really
the first one's very, very good, yeah.
And then, of course, when I was getting into comics in even the early 1990s, I remember the death of Superman, which happened in 1992, which was the biggest comics event that happened in history and ruined comics for 10 years.
Wow, really?
Destroyed the industry. Yeah, because the speculation surrounding the death of Superman, which sold like 1 million copies in 2 days, which is an unthinkable number. Like no comic in the world today sells that many issues. But it was huge. It was everywhere. It was being reported on the news like it was a real thing, like it was a real event. Superman is dead. What does this mean for the world? And
that's amazing.
It didn't stick. And then through the back half of the 1990s, there were all of these attempts to revitalize Superman, to make him relevant, to turn him into a character that can live in a world with, Cable and Wolverine and Image Comics and things like that. And you can't do that to Superman. He can't take it. So it took a long time. And I think that A Superman for All Seasons is a kind of forcible restatement of who and what Superman is.
Yes.
I think that's clearly part of Jeph Loeb's intention here is to give us an insight into what it is that makes this character special, and certainly to pull away from the idea that Superman is the real character and Clark Kent is the disguise. That is powerfully inverted in this comic book.
Yes.
In the same way it was inverted in the piece of Superman media which I consumed first and most enthusiastically, which was, now remind me, it's known in this country as Lois and Clark.
Yes.
The New Adventures of Superman?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
In Britain, it's just The New Adventures of Superman.
Okay.
That was the title that it was given.
We needed that really dumb pun on the guys who
that
discovered
show.
America.
That's why it wouldn't matter in Britain, because nobody knows who Lewis and Clark are.
I constantly got these things mixed up. When I was a little kid, I was just like, Lewis and Clark. What's the connection there?
Lois and Clark traveled across the world with
like, I don't understand the
Sacagawea, and that's why we have her on a gold coin now.
And that's why Superman is in love with Lois.
That's the obvious inference.
Yes.
No, I loved that show back in the 90s.
I do remember that show too. Yeah, I don't think
series. I
I
adored it.
that show.
I don't think we watched it a lot, but I do remember it. I mean, like, what would it come on like Sunday nights or something like that?
I
Like, it
remember
would just
watching
be
it with
on
my
TV. Yeah, I think I remember watching it with my dad. Yeah.
But it's really interesting kind of having my memories of that show, which went a long way toward kind of reestablishing Clark Kent as the character and Superman as the disguise. I think that's a really good dynamic. And if you get away from that dynamic, you're probably going to tell stories, which I'm much less interested in. Thank you very much. In much the same way as I prefer a Batman who is primarily Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
And who wears the mask and is not worn by the mask in quite that way. But it's interesting looking back on the New Adventures of Superman, looking at Superman for All Seasons, and then thinking about the influence that Jeph Loeb would have in Smallville.
Yeah.
Which was a show that I never watched religiously.
I never watched that show ever.
That show ran for 10 seasons.
How?
A little bit of it, and never
Doesn't
could
it
get
start
into
when
it.
he's like 16?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew a lot of people that were super into it, and I can see why. Like, there were glimmers in there. It even made me want to go back up until we released these new CW shows, and I was like, well, I'm never going back to Smallville now. Before that, I was really thinking about going back, but I never could get into it. I'd come on, and I'd catch an episode here and there, and I did enjoy it, but it was very CW.
Yeah, yeah. Very
WB.
2000s WB, CW.
WB,
Yeah,
UPN,
absolutely, yeah.
CW.
Which is something that the CW shows we have now really fought and broke away from, I think, and did a really good job, because when Arrow first came out, I was like, oh, this is looking a lot like Smallville. And then it just slowly became not that. And I was like, oh, you guys did it. You broke off from it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'd be really interested to go back and look at the depiction of Superman in Smallville and kind of, not Superman, of course, to the best of my knowledge, they don't use the name. And I believe they only show like a glimpse of the suit. You only get a glimpse of blue and red in like the final episode, which I love, even though he's wearing blue and red throughout the entire series.
Yeah.
That's so good. That's so smart. And when I look back on it now, I think actually that's a show I probably would have really liked if I could have got over the fact that it was
a CW show.
Smallville. Yeah.
I mean, a WB show. Yeah. Alistair, you just talking about how you really appreciate stories where, we're focusing more on Clark Kent as the disguise, or we're focusing more on like, a Batman story where he's mostly Bruce Wayne. Just made me think of like why Wonder Woman is the best, because even in the film Wonder Woman, no one ever calls her Wonder Woman. They just call her Diana. She's just the one person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be really interested to see how they handle that in Justice League. The idea of her living this private life in Paris, I'm fascinated by that.
Yes.
I'm really interested to how they handle that.
So before we dive into our first issue, let's just throw out some quick trivia. The title of our comic is a reference to the 1960 Robert Bolt play Man for All Seasons. The play portrays Thomas More as a man of principle, envied by his rivals, and loved by the common people and by his family. Does that sound familiar? The story also parallels the events from Superman's then origin story, John Byrne's The Man of Steel, though it can be read on its own without that, as we're going to do here. The artwork contains many, many influences from Norman Rockwell, as we might talk about a little bit as we go through. And it was highly praised by fans and critics when it came out. It was voted the third best foreign comic book published in Japan in the Gaiman Award, actually.
That's amazing. Wow.
So, yeah.
Huh. I'm fascinated that it travels that. But I mean, I kind of want to talk a little about, Americana. I kind of want to talk about Norman Rockwell and how much this book feels to you guys here in Oklahoma City, where you have both lived for all of your lives or much of your lives.
Yes.
How much this feels like the Midwest, because it definitely feels like the Midwest to me, but I am a stranger here.
Sure.
Much like Clark Kent. I came from far beyond the stars with remarkable abilities.
I grew up in a couple of small towns near Oklahoma City. I've lived in Oklahoma my whole life, but these small towns I grew up in were nowhere near as small as Smallville. That being said, there are towns here that are.
It reminded me of Guthrie, actually, just like how, because Guthrie still has like that historic look to it, and like just the way that like the storefronts and the buildings look, or even Anadarko, which is where the camp that I go to all the time is located. And yeah, just when you see them walking through like downtown Smallville, I guess it is. I mean, it really was just like, wow, I don't know what time period we're in, but like I'm there. Like I get it. I get this feeling and this aesthetic, and it did feel very Americana to me. I was like, oh, I see what we're doing, and you're doing it very, very well.
Yeah, Guthrie even has a small convenience store, general store, like in this comic in the small town that actually has a full bar that serves milkshakes and everything, where you can also buy your aspirin and whatever else.
Perfect.
So with all that being said, let's dive right into issue 1. This is Spring. And as the issue states at the beginning, witness the humble beginnings of a young man who would grow to become the world's greatest hero. A tale of Superman's earliest adventures told on a mythic scale. Some versions of this comic, I don't know which versions haven't, which versions don't, start off with some black and white photos of Clark growing up. Did either of the versions
mine did. The trade that I have.
No, that's interesting.
So some versions have that, some versions don't.
It was super cute and darling. I liked it a lot.
Pretty cute, little baby Superman.
Yeah, there's like little baby Clark napping with the dog. It's just like, oh my gosh.
That's the thing. I don't think I brought up too much in my notes, but this dog really has a good relationship with Clark. This dog is just all throughout the comic, and toward the end, you really see the payoff of that relationship.
Yeah.
So.
That's great.
So we start with Pa Kent narrating this issue. He's going over the classic Superman phrases: man of steel, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, change the course of mighty rivers faster than a speeding bullet. And just to talk on the origins of that real quick, the leap tall buildings and faster than a speeding bullet originated with the 40s radio show based off descriptions from Action Comics #1. And the river part was added in the 50s live action show. The name Man of Steel has been around since issue 6 of Action Comics and is a riff off an older character, Doc Savage, who was known as the Man of Bronze.
That's really interesting. So my question is, how does he change the flow of rivers?
My read of this was that it was pulled from Herculean legend. You know, when Hercules cleanses the Aegean stables by diverting the course of the river to run through the stables and thus wash them clean. It seems suitably mythic and heroic.
Right, but Superman never actually like did that.
Yeah, I mean, he probably did at one point.
There's a lot of discussion to be had off of Superman being based off of ancient myths and things like that. And that's a discussion for when we talk about All-Star Superman, which I hope we never do because there's just so much to talk about that podcast would take forever.
It really would.
It's really good, but it would take forever to really deep dive that. I'm not looking forward to that day.
What do you guys make of Pa Kent's opening narration here?
I love it.
I think that Jeph Loeb manages to anchor us in this character immediately. It's crazy how good it is.
Yeah, I know Loeb said that originally he planned on not having a narrator, which is crazy because Loeb narrates everything.
Yeah.
So I could not see how that was
What are you
possible.
thinking, Jeff?
It's also the strongest element of this entire series.
Yeah,
which is
no,
He
completely.
actually started to put that voice in there. It made a lot of sense. And then he was like, after putting Paul's voice in there, he's like, well, I can't put Paul in the other issues. So then he had to come up with a device to switch it between issues. And I think he does a really good job of finding these voices, especially Paul. I really like the way that Paul talks and the way that he talks about Clark as his son. And Jeph Loeb said that this was completely inspired just by the way that he felt about his own son, because he had a young son at that time. And so he just basically talked as he would talk about his own son.
Oh my gosh, that's so precious. I love it.
So Pa Kent takes us back to a time before Superman was all that. Back when it was just a man's son. Back on the farm, a young Clark helps Pa Kent with a large rock in the field. Pa's narration tells us how Clark came to be his son. As Clark lifts the large rock single-handedly, Paul looks frustrated and comments that Clark has a lot of Ma Kent in him. The same stubbornness.
It's so good. It's so good.
The line is, but that's Martha for you. Stubborn as a mule, twice as set in her ways. Wonderful woman. Marry her all over again tomorrow if that's what she wanted. The boy's got a lot of Martha in him. Let's leave it at that. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Pa's frustration can be read poorly, I think, but I read it as worry. He sees his son as so different, and such a small act of strength carries a whole future in Pa's mind.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's springtime, we learn. Clark is graduating high school, and he seems deeply lost in thought. We see Lana is Clark's closest friend. There's that line there where she says, "You tell me if something was really wrong, right?" And he says, "Who else would I tell?"
Yeah.
Well, maybe Pete, I guess.
Pete.
Get out of here, Pete.
Pete.
Ma and Pa talk that night. Pa expresses his worries with Clark's powers, and Ma expresses her unwavering faith in Clark. Clark listens from his room, and the narration poetically tells us that no matter how many times you plow a field, suddenly you'll hit a rock that you never found there before, but had been there all along. Talking about Clark and just how these things, talking about life in general, really.
Yeah.
How those rocks come across.
Yeah. It's a really great scene. That panel of Clark reclining on his bed with the dog by his side manages to do something that I think Sale is going for all the way through this series and doesn't always hit perfectly for me, which is that combination of the outsized superheroic frame of Clark Kent. He is giant.
He's huge.
But he's also, what is he supposed to be, 17?
17 or 18, if he's graduating high school.
So he has this boyish face, and sometimes that really works, and sometimes
it doesn't.
Sometimes it just looks like he has a weird
tiny baby. He looks like Turbo Vicky from Monster Factory.
I remember the cover of this comic turning me off slightly when I first saw it, because I was like, why does Superman have a weird small baby face and such a large head?
No, it's wild, some of the way that it looks.
But on the note of that bedroom scene, what's funny is this scene's actually repeated, I think, 3 times throughout.
I think so too,
First off, here you have the messy bedroom, and he's laying the same exact way in each one of them on his bed, and he's with the dog. And the next one, he's in Metropolis, and he's got a cleaner room, and of course his own room. And then the next one, he's back at home, and the room's all nice and clean, and the dog's back there again. But it's the same angle, it's the same way he's sitting. And there's something really poetic about the recurrence of that, and the small details that change throughout.
And it emphasizes throughout this sense of loneliness.
Yeah.
You know, there's a reason that Superman comes from Kansas in this version of the story, and it's that wide horizon and that giant sky. It's that idea that he is in this landscape insignificant, and he will be insignificant later in the landscape of Metropolis too, but it's a very different kind of insignificance. And I love this image. I mean, when I was growing up, my parents did not get along, and I remember many nights that I would lay in bed listening to them talk or argue, and that idea of being awake late at night when you know you shouldn't be and hearing things that you don't want to hear, that's like powerfully evocative for me personally. So I'm right there with Clark in this moment.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I had a very similar experience being raised.
And y'all didn't even have super hearing. Aww.
The narration continues in its allusion to Clark as he, Lana, and their friend Pete hang out, presumably the next day.
Who is Pete?
I'm going to get to that in just a second. Talking about how important roots are to crops surviving and saying Clark is lucky to have Smallville. And that's a really big point about Superman. Clark had his roots. His moral compass grew strong enough to support his great power because of his good roots in Smallville.
If you distill this entire book down to one thing, it is the caption on this gorgeous double page spread that we get of Lana and Clark and Pete walking downtown Smallville, walking Main Street of Smallville. And it's this: sometimes when the corn was planted, it shot up too soon. The roots hadn't taken hold, so the stalk couldn't support its own weight. The corn would turn sour. I don't know if Clark knew how lucky he was growing up in a place like Smallville.
Yep, and we'll see some contrast in another character shortly.
It's gorgeous.
Clark still seems very lost in thought, and we're introduced to Pete Ross by Pa saying a little of him goes a long way.
He's like castor oil.
Pete Ross first appeared in Superboy number 86 in 1961, a series that was about preteen and teen Clark, not a character separately who is now known as Superboy.
Which is a clone of Superman and Lex Luthor. Okay, all right.
Don't do it.
Then there's son of Superman. Hey, is he called Superboy?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, okay.
The new one?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jonathan, I think so.
Oh my gosh, his name is Jonathan. I just connected that.
Yeah.
Aw.
Pete was the childhood best friend of Clark, who finds out his secret early on and uses this knowledge to help Clark keep this secret.
Okay.
Yep, that's basically all you need to know about him.
Yep.
Our trio of friends sit down at the counter of the general store and we meet some small town locals. Some talking about tornadoes, which will be important shortly. And I should mention that's a group of older men playing cards, and they'll keep coming back up throughout the series. It's kind of adorable.
It's really great.
I love it.
Speaking of Guthrie, my wife lived in Guthrie for a while, and I know Guthrie pretty well. There are those regulars who just hang out in the coffee shop. You get to know them just because they're there every day.
Yeah.
So I can really relate to this quite a bit.
Is this the panel where we get like the most Norman Rockwell-ass drawing ever in the history of ever?
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a panel here where they're sitting at the bar, and this mimics Rockwell's painting The Runaway almost exactly the way that Clark is looking and everything. Because I think he's sitting where the police officer in the painting is sitting. And then Lana is sitting where the little girl in the painting is sitting. So I think it mimics it very close, which gives us a hint at Clark's feelings, I think. He's thinking about running away, thinking about leaving Smallville.
Oh, that's really smart.
I think that's a really cool thing that you can read into that, at least. We get to learn that Clark knows everyone here in this small town life. We get our first mention of Lex Luthor as a rich, larger than life character who may be doing a lot of good with his money. Actually, Pete says that he gives away a lot of it. He references giving it away anyways. We don't know exactly what's going on with that. Clark realizes he was supposed to get a haircut that day, leaving his friends and running next door. But as he sits, his X-ray vision kicks in, seemingly for maybe the first time, but at least surprising him and showing him his friends next door who are discussing his weird behavior. The barber scissors break on Clark's hair.
I'm so glad this happened. This is okay. I don't want to talk about Man of Steel, but I'm going to really, really quickly. You know how in Man of Steel, whenever Henry Cavill shows up and he's got like that huge sad beard?
Yep.
How did he shave that off?
I think
there are lots of
canonically that Superman shaves using a mirror and his own heat vision.
Yep.
Wow.
That I think is usually how
I'm
it's
glad we
depicted.
didn't actually have to watch that.
It would have looked real dumb.
It would have looked really dumb because that's really dumb.
Yeah. Alternatively, he could just get some kryptonite, hold it close, shave.
Do you have like a kryptonite razor? Isn't that gonna like slice his flesh off his face?
In the same way that a regular razor could also potentially do that.
I guess if it's okay, maybe it's just like a regular razor, but with like a thin strip of kryptonite on the very, very end, just enough for the hairs.
I do really like the barber refuses to believe anything weird happened. Like, they don't make scissors like they used to.
That's the damnedest thing.
But I love that, right? Because that's the march of progress in Smallville. That's the outside world. We're getting this perspective on Metropolis that it's this fantasy place. When Lana asks, do you think there really is a Lex Luthor, or did they make that up to sell newspapers?
Yeah.
The idea that we live in a world where Smallville is as contained as it is and is being encroached upon by modernity, that, I mean, yes, so Americana, so Midwest, so Norman Rockwell.
Yeah.
It's everything right there in that idea.
Yeah.
I love it so much. And coupled with the idea, of course, that no one can suspect that Clark is anything but the, star of the high school football team, I guess. Yeah.
I'm not sure to what degree, but I do know that different Superman origin stories differ on how his powers developed. There seems to be taking quite a late approach in this one, showing that just now his hair is uncuttable all of a sudden at the age of 17 or 18. But not all do that. I've seen some where just baby Superman's like flying around lifting up things.
Oh, sure.
Back in the Silver Age. Yep. Super baby.
Super baby.
And even here in this comic, we see that Paul has already had plenty of evidence for Clark being superhuman in many ways.
Yeah, I wonder about that and the turning point, the kind of the internal inciting incident that we get, because weirdly this book keeps us at quite a distance from Clark. We don't get insight into him, but we don't get direct insight into him. And I wonder if that's part of Pa's kind of hesitance about Clark lifting the rock out in the field, is that that's literally the first time he's done it, or maybe even the first time he's been able to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and we don't get any hint here that he can fly yet until he does with Lana later. So I'm curious about, how much this is sudden,
it is interesting
puberty onset of power phenomenon.
Right.
Not much of this comic really takes place inside of Clark's head. That's something that
Almost none of it.
So we really only see what other people see. So you don't get to see those intimate moments where Clark just by himself realizing he can fly, realizing he can pick up a large rock. He kind of knows these things already when the other characters notice it, and we get that in the narration. So that's kind of interesting because it's more of a comment on how we see Superman.
Exactly. Which is related to that idea that he's an icon, that he's a hero. He's maybe the only real kind of mythic classical hero that we have in modern comic books. Yeah. It really works for me.
So in surprise, Superman takes off, leaving his friends, running home. He outruns a train on his way home. The panel of him cutting off the train, running in front of it, is pretty beautiful, truly faster than a locomotive. It's looks like an homage to one of the first panels of Action Comics #1, where he's running next to alongside of a train, and also the beginning of the 1978 Superman movie, which also homaged that, but also had him cutting in front of the train, running home. So it's a great moment for me because it makes me remember that movie. Clark stands in the field and Pa checks on him, and one line of dialogue almost breaks me here. Pa, I'm scared.
No. Yeah.
It's incredible when Martha tells Jonathan, when Ma tells Pa, be gentle.
Yeah.
He just says, yep. Walking out across the yard there.
What a good old boy Jonathan Kent is.
Good. I just adore this guy. Yeah.
This is the Jonathan Kent we deserved, people. But yes, 3 emotionally filled, impactful words. Glorious. Yeah. The narration reminds us that Pa knows Clark isn't a normal boy, and he says as much as he wanted to tell him all life's answers could be found in Smallville. All he could promise him is that he and Ma loved him. Later, a tornado comes through the small town.
It's a twister.
Clark realizes his heroic potential, saying, I can handle this. I know I can.
Yeah.
Rushing into town and saving Morris, who we met earlier in the store, from the gas station, which explodes. Pa tells us that he believes in that moment Clark became a man. The town has been hit hard. Morris questions if Clark flew in and saved him, but reasons that the tornado just carried him with the strong winds. Clark returns home, seeing the destruction and being worried. Ma and Pa emerge from their cellar, glad to see their son safe. And the panel of them all hugging is beautiful.
It's really good.
Spectacular.
Really good.
Yeah.
Thank God that Tim Sale managed to preserve like his panel layouts throughout this book. We get no, 9 panel pages here. We get 2 or 3, and that's enough because every single one of them is a landscape. It's gorgeous.
It was done really purposeful. I read they really wanted to minimalize how many panels there were and really just make them big and beautiful and powerful.
Yeah. The detail in some of these panels is absolutely ridiculous. I was looking at whenever Clark is going to get his haircut and you see him get his x-ray vision like through the mirror there. Because Sale went through and like hand did all of this and it was like hand painted and then like hand inked. It's not just like I'm going to copy this scene in Photoshop and then paste it into this other thing. Because I was looking at it, I was like, okay, well, how identical is this? There are very, very minute differences. Like the wood grain is slightly pinker in the bottom one than the one on top. And that's just incredible to me because I cannot draw the same thing twice in a row. I just can't. I draw one thing, that's it forever. Can never draw it again.
This is where we see Clark flying, and he flies the tractor out of the roof of their home and mentions that he can't help but think that he could have done more. This defining moment for Clark. I really love the panel. He says, I could have done more. And the narration says what he said, the look in his eyes. I could have done more.
Yeah. This is the counter argument to anyone who says that Superman is boring because he is perfect.
Yeah.
Superman is not perfect. Superman is haunted all the time by the lives that he can't save, by the lives that he hasn't saved, by the forces that he can't conquer. You've got a supervillain threatening Metropolis. Superman's actually going to be pretty useful. He's going to be pretty good. But if you're dealing with, cancer, or you're dealing with old age, or you're dealing with just social injustice, there's only so much that the Man of Steel can do.
Right.
And that haunts him. He's driven to do more. Yeah. And that is what I respond to in Superman. That's what I need in order for a depiction of Superman to work for me. I need him to be, Cap.
Yeah.
There's a reason that these two guys are my guys.
That really reminds me of Buffy too in season 5 whenever spoiler alert, Buffy's mom dies and it's just you can't punch you can't punch an aneurysm. It turns out you can't send an aneurysm back to hell from whence it came. And just this idea that you take your superpowered character who is so strong and has faced like every single thing that comes up against them, and then it's like, well, okay, here is just some regular stupid old mundane thing that you can't just punch it. You can't fight it. You can't make it go away. It's just life sometimes.
Yeah. We have this beautiful scene where Clark is talking to his pastor, asking, what if one man could have stopped all the destruction and didn't? And the pastor says, well, there's no man who could do that. But Clark replies, but what if there was one? And the pastor's then distracted, taken away with church repairs. But it's a really beautiful scene. I really like that moment. We skip to just after graduation, and Paul says, I never thought about our time together until it grew too short.
Yeah.
Parents are important.
Clark takes Lana off on their own and says he has something to talk to her about, something maybe impulsive. He starts to fly with her, saying, Lana, will you? And as we turn the page, they are flying, and he continues, will you please just trust me? I can fly. He tells Lana he has these powers and needs to leave Smallville to help as many people as he can. He promises to come back, and she kisses him.
Crucially, she tells him that he has to leave Smallville. He's saying it, he's going to say it, but she's there ahead of him.
I guess that's true, yeah.
Which is, God, it's so perfect that she completely understands him, that her world has just been turned upside down.
Right.
Her high school boyfriend can fly.
Yes. This
is crazy. But also she understands who Clark is, kind of emphasizing this idea that Clark is Clark is Clark. And he would have done this without the powers.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter, where he is from or what he can do. He's still the man that he is.
Yeah.
I should know at this point there is a Mark Millar comic called Huck that we should cover one day. And its kind of elevator pitch is basically what if Superman never left Smallville?
Really?
It's pretty fascinating.
I'm into that idea. I run hot and cold on Mark Millar, as most comics readers do.
I would agree. And I enjoy them.
I really liked all of the coloring throughout like all of these panels here with Lana. The only thing, and maybe this is just a personal thing, I don't care about Lana.
Yeah, I think you kind of have to have a certain amount of pre-existing investment in Lana Lang before you come into this book.
Yeah.
Otherwise, she is just, at least until you get to her narration in the later
And
issue.
even, like, I appreciated the narrator, and we'll get to it here in a few minutes, and so I won't talk too much of it. But all I saw, I was like, who's this little redheaded chick who's not my Amy Adams Lois Lane? I don't care. Don't care.
Yeah, the movies have not done a great job of showing us who Lana is.
No, not
But if
really.
you had watched Smallville.
Well, okay, yeah, and I think I remember seeing a couple of episodes and being like, who is this chick? Where is Lois Lane? Like, and that was the other thing that I knew about Superman. You got Superman, you got Lois Lane. OTP, that's it.
I want to go back just a couple of pages to the party scene that we see in the Kent's backyard, where we get this line of narration from Pa, where he says, Martha had already taken Clark to buy a new suit. We brought suitcases down from the attic. And then when we cut to Clark sitting on the porch with Ma, and he's wearing the world's worst suit.
It's the worst suit in the world.
Brilliant. It is
It's the
such a
best suit in
suit.
Smallville,
Yeah.
but it's the worst suit in
It's
the
probably
world.
Had to be super custom tailored to fit him.
Oh, yeah, because he's a giant man.
But it's so awful that, the way that it bunches around his arms and the way that it's short on his legs.
It
it's
doesn't fit
brilliant.
good.
It's
Yeah.
so good.
Later, Clark, dressed in his nice suit, all packed
Well,
for
nice.
Metropolis, talks to Ma, who encourages him and meets Pa in the field looking at the sunrise. Pa's narration really gets the feeling of watching your kids finally leave and start their own lives. Not that I've experienced it.
Yeah.
And he says, do you ever get tired of looking at that? And Pa says, no, never have. Guess I never will.
Aw.
And
we cut from that gorgeous 2-page spread to another 2-page spread of Metropolis,
Yeah, Metropolis.
our introduction to Metropolis.
And there's a beautiful bit of narration that kind of leads into that about Pa talking about the skies there.
Yeah, time passes. The country mouse leaves Smallville, becomes a city mouse. I never cared for Metropolis much. Can't see the horizon unless you're flying over it. Maybe that's why Clark chose to settle there after all.
He can fly over as much as he wants.
can fly over it.
Time passes and Clark is now living in Metropolis and working as a reporter for the Daily Planet. We are introduced to editor Perry White, photographer Jimmy Olsen, and rival reporter Lois Lane. All classic Superman characters created by Siegel and Schuster. Lois Lane made her first appearance right along with Superman in Action Comics #1 in 1938. Perry White made his first appearance in Superman #7 in 1940. And Jimmy Olsen first appeared in Action Comics #6 in 1938, but only as a cameo with no name. First being named on the radio show in 1940 and then appearing named in comics in Superman 13 in 1941.
He's Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen.
He is.
Those are the classic three right there.
Yeah.
Always showing up in those old comics.
That's him.
Lois is going on a date with Lex Luthor, where we
What?
get the gag of Superman blowing his hat off and exposing his balding head. As most people know, Lex Luthor is bald in most things, but here he has a little bit of hair still going on.
It was the olden days. Yeah.
Superman saves a boy from falling off the ledge of a skyscraper.
Can we talk about this
Where
stupid boy
are these
real
kids'
quick?
parents?
I hate this kid. Where are his parents?
Who let him out there?
Why is he playing on a freaking ledge
Also,
outside of his apartment
is setting
building?
him back on the ledge really helping Superman?
No, Superman, it's not.
Take him somewhere
Did
safe.
you give him anti-gravity boots?
Take him to DHS or something.
What
Because
is, yeah,
obviously
where is your
something's going
mom?
on here.
Where are your mom and pop? Like, okay, I would not be blowing up about this, except that this kid shows up again 2 more times on this ledge. And I'm just like, why is this happening?
I'm happy to whistle past it because every line of dialogue that we get surrounding this kid
Yes.
is the best thing in
I
the
mean,
world.
okay, no, let's
Yes.
I like
So
your
good.
suit. My mom made it is the single greatest
Thanks.
line in
My
comics
mom made it for me.
ever. But seriously, Trev?
Superman just throwing that little salute there too as he's talking to the kid. That's so great.
Also, really getting a good look at the Superman costume here for the first time.
Yeah.
It's nice to notice that when he's Clark Kent, his clothes kind of swallow him up, even though he's a big guy.
Yeah.
These things just look big on him.
They have a
Weird.
big and tall in Metropolis, and it was the best day
so,
of
yeah.
Clark's life.
And then he's in the suit and it shows off all of his muscles. He really does transform and become a completely different person in that suit.
Yeah. We also get to see this vision of Metropolis. We can see this skyway full of people behind Superman in this shot. And it's obviously, you know, the glittering future of tomorrow. It's this city that's not quite concordant with the rest of America that we see in the course of this book. And that's, of course, true to the original depictions of Metropolis, too.
Yeah. I should note that the city from the comic books, Metropolis, is named after the old sci-fi silent movie, Metropolis.
Oh.
Later, Luthor sees Superman fly by his window and says, "It's going to be a long, hot summer." Pa ends his narration saying that they worry about their son just like any other parents, even if he is Superman. The narration talks of Pa's worry, saying that he, Superman, will stay out of harm's way as the panel shows Lex Luthor, which is a nice touch.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. It's a really strong ending to the issue and really cues us in for a transition into issue 2.
That's right. And that does bring us to issue 2, Summer, which starts out saying, witness the transformation of the man of tomorrow from figure of mystery to guardian angel of an entire city. This issue is narrated by Lois Lane, who starts off listing the 3 reporting rules. Believe none of what you hear, half of what you see, and everything you write.
I like that.
Yeah.
Which I guess were Perry's rules. Which I really like her narration. This again, the way the voices are done here, she really does speak like a reporter as she narrates this. And
Yeah.
we're gonna see,
They're
like,
so
very
distinct.
personal, distinct
Love that so
throughout.
much. Yeah.
And the lettering even looks more like it has been typed.
Yes.
Which I just love. That's
Specific.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm a reporter or a newspaperman, as Perry would put it. A damn good one by anyone's standards, and mine are pretty high. I like Perry's rules. They make sense to me. Strike that. They made sense to me. Because now those rules fall into the same category. It's all BS before Superman.
Which is a good line. It's a good line. It's cheesy. But it's a good line.
Okay.
It's cheesy, but it's a good line.
It's the right kind of cheesy is the thing. It's exactly what she would write for the Bugle. Yeah, I love it.
She says that she was the
I'm
first.
going to have to correct myself.
You just
Exactly
said
what
the
she would write
Bugle.
on the planet. I have there's a weird thing in my brain where I always confuse those
I
two.
always do that too.
All the time.
Yep.
Doesn't matter. Moving on.
That's okay. When Perry
I just said that so
showed
that I don't get the email.
Yes,
Because
yeah.
I know it's coming.
Yeah.
You, who's writing the email right now, stop writing that email.
Stop it.
I know.
Stop it.
I'm a dumbo. It's fine.
Don't at me.
She says that she was the first to call him Superman, but what she wanted to call him was too good to be true. Again, real cheesy.
I thought, I had some trouble following. Like after this, I was like, okay, bring me back to Lana. I'm more interested in Lana. I think I'm done with Lois.
She wonders at a man with such unbelievable power who can do anything he wants and actually decides to be a hero in a world where normal people are so against each other. She struggles with her words, noting the humor at her career being built on that not happening, and compares him to Santa Claus and Prince Charming. And I enjoy that she talks about a fake Prince Charming as they show Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
Lois says that she estimates Luthor's income at about $150 per second, literally making it not worth his time to pick up $100 if he found it on the street.
That was pretty good. I liked that.
Which that's an annual income of $4.5 billion a year.
What?
It's infinite money.
That sounds crazy, but this is actually similar and probably based off of a fact about Bill Gates, who has said the same thing has been said of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seriously?
I think his was like $130 a second, but pretty similar.
And he gives it all away.
He sure does. He gives a lot of his money away.
Canonically, in the DC universe, is Lex Luthor more wealthy than Bruce Wayne? He must be, right?
He's got to be if he's making $150 a second.
Question.
He must be.
Someone will let us know. Hey, let us know.
Bruce Wayne spends a lot of that money on,
That's
wonderful
true.
toys.
Yes.
I could Google it, but I'd rather hear from you, dear listener.
At Excelsior Cast over on Twitter.
While Lois narrates, Superman catches a nuclear missile heading to Metropolis. He hurls it into space and locates the submarine that launched it. He picks up the sub and drops it at the Metropolis airbase where Lex Luthor is waiting.
This happening also made me think, again, I don't want to talk about Batman versus Superman, but here we are. Because Clark is out in space and he's fine. Like, he's totally fine. He can just be out there. Like, he's not going to, like, die. It's cool.
Yeah,
it's
that
great.
goes back and forth in the comics. There are often times where he's out there with a space helmet. There's often times where he's just out there, and it's just really inconsistent.
This is one of the reasons that talking about the history of Superman is so hard, because, as we said, he started off as a guy who was, pretty strong. He can run
And
pretty
could
fast
jump
and
real
jump pretty
good.
high, and he's
Leap
fine.
tall buildings. He can't
But
fly.
it's
He can leap.
Basically super strength, and that evolves into eventually any power.
God power.
Yeah.
He started out
God
as
mode.
Batroc the Super Leaper.
Oh, Patrick, right. I remember him.
Patrick, the jumper boy.
It's a good jumper boy.
He's a great jumper boy.
The army starts to arrest those on the sub, but it turns out Lois was on the sub, and the captain has taken her hostage at gunpoint. Lois shows courage and jokingly asking Superman to make the captain shut up, and Lex says he will deal with the situation because he can negotiate with anyone. But before he can even finish getting those words out, Superman, faster than a speeding bullet, rushes in, grabs the gun, smashes it, and returns to Luthor's side.
This was so good. It was such an excellent set of panels. I loved this very much.
Well done.
And great sound effects, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Superman compresses the gun with a scrunch, and Lois jams her heel into the foot of the sub-captain with a gash, and then elbows him in the stomach with a tump.
Yep.
These are very good sound effects.
Good thump.
She
Lois
thumped him
does
good.
I'm
shows
sorry,
some
yes.
self-defense.
And
The
judo chops him to the back of the neck with a chop.
Yeah, which is cool that Lois is the one that takes out the captain.
I
after.
love
really
that.
like
That is so important. It's so important that Lois is empowered and capable. And you believe that she got herself into the situation because she fully believed that she could get herself out.
Right.
And again, this
How
is one
did
of those
she
things
get
where
on
you
that
don't ever
submarine?
find out.
We whistle past it.
Yeah, Clark will ask her and she'll be like, we all have our secrets.
Yeah.
It's like she was working undercover for a story. It's just like in the movie when she's just randomly in another country. It's like, what are you doing here? What's going on?
Who sent you
work
here?
for the Daily Planet. What are you doing?
And we get this great moment of vulnerability where he flies her back and leaves her on the roof of the planet. And as he flies away, he says, "Good luck with your story, Lois." And she says, "Damn you." And then we get this panel of her in the elevator where she says very quietly to herself, "Gotta be the cape."
Yeah. Before we get to that point, there's a couple more things I wanted to mention. Lex offers her a ride in his limo back to the office, but she opts to fly with Superman, of course.
Duh.
Saying every second matters. Superman informs Lex that his company name was all over that sub and threatens what he will do to him if he finds out that Lex was involved. Lex starts to rant, but Superman and Lois don't stick around to listen.
Yeah.
And
He just goes, just bye.
the interesting thing about this is during World War II, with Top Secret Manhattan Project in full swing, any mention of nuclear weapons in the popular press drew the government's ire. And DC found this out the hard way when they were developing a comic book where Superman's archenemy, Lex Luthor, launched an attack with a nuclear bomb. And since he calls it an atomic bomb, even though it's not actually, it doesn't look like one in the comics, the U.S. War Department demanded that they delay this publication on this comic, so it actually got delayed quite a bit. And so I think this is a reference back to that old story with Lex launching an atomic bomb.
So this is just a sci-fi gadget that he happened to call an atomic bomb, not knowing that atomic bombs were possible in real life. And the government were like, "Hey, you probably shouldn't say that."
Isn't
and
there
they're
another
like, "Why?
story?
Do we have a
Isn't there another story where it was either like a movie or a comic where somebody had to decide, like, had to do the interior of like a B-52 bomber, but nobody is allowed to know what those look like, but it looked so similar to what the actual B-52 looks like that the government stepped in and was like, hold on one second though, we need to have a talk.
Whose job is it to watch all movies and read all comic books and censor them for this stuff?
I don't know.
I will take that job, please.
Yes, please.
It's a cushy government
I'll keep
job.
your secrets. I don't care. It's fine.
Whatevs.
I won't Snowden you, I promise. Not if you let me read every comic. I'm good.
Lois tells Superman that no one talks to Luthor the way that he did, and he replies, "Well, it's about time that somebody did."
Hell yeah.
Superman rushes in and greets her in the office as Clark, which I really loved. He just like zooms in there and he's like, "Oh, I've been here this whole time. How's it going?" She picks back up the narration saying that no man can live up to Prince Charming, and then comes along Superman. She wonders what he does when he isn't saving the world, and we see him sitting
He
at
makes
home
like
alone.
a cup of noodles.
Yeah. Scoffing at Clark's suggestion that he might have some kind of fortress of solitude. We see Clark sitting at home and then taking off to return to Smallville. Clark spends time with his parents saying that he's lonely, and he goes to see Lana but finds out that she's been out traveling for years. And we know for the first time here that these seasons aren't in the same year, that these actually do pass certain years at certain points. Clark catches up with Pete at the general store and finds out that he never left, just like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, which is actually a good reference. I think I might have skipped this earlier. When he walks in, he rubs the elephant's head
little elephant,
and says, "I want $1 million bucks," which is it's exactly what happens in It's a Wonderful Life with George Bailey. He goes in there and he wants to travel a lot, which is George Bailey, and never does George Bailey, because Jeph Loeb actually really just likes taking things from other mediums and putting them in his own stories. I'm not going to say that that's just stealing things. He's making good like references.
No, it's homage.
Absolutely.
He does it so much that I wonder sometimes. It's probably good that he's just like, mostly executive producing things now.
Right. Well, I mean, at least he didn't write himself into his own story.
That's true.
I just read a novel where that happened for several chapters.
Listen, Stephen King's amazing. Okay?
No, I'm not saying it was bad. I'm just saying that I spent a lot of time reading Stephen King's novel about what Stephen King was doing in the novel.
Happy belated birthday, dear Mr. King.
Your work is excellent. I'm enjoying the story. He listens to the podcast.
He does quite often. We get emails from him every week.
do.
Have you not read those emails? The whole town thinks that Clark is their claim to fame. A successful city reporter. They are quick to
Man,
celebrate.
Smallville. A low bar benefits everyone, I guess.
Clark tells Ma that he thought Smallville would feel like home still, but it's changed. She encourages him that he will find his way. And this is that classic alien motif that we talked about near the beginning of Superman, never quite fitting in anywhere, never quite feeling at home anywhere.
Though there's a really interesting echo here on the page where he's sitting on the porch swing with his mom, which echoes the page where she's sitting there with Pa Kent in the first issue and Clark is overhearing their conversation. He has pretty much the same panel where he's kind of looking off into the middle distance and the sky is reflected in his glasses. Yeah. So you can't see his eyes at all, just in this case, the stars rather than the sunset. Yeah. It's gorgeously done. And even as he's saying, I don't belong here, he's absolutely physically echoing Pa Kent, with whom he shares no physical resemblance whatsoever.
Right.
But still, here he is. That Smallville that is what is inside of Clark Kent. And it's perfect. Mm-hmm. I love this book so much,
it's
you guys.
Very good.
I'm so glad we're doing this. And I'm so glad this is our first Superman book.
Yeah.
Back in Metropolis, Lois narrates about a fire that broke out on the last day of summer at a company LexCorp was looking to buy. Lex dispatches what he calls the Guardians of the City to save the day.
They look like Green Goblins.
Yeah, Lois calls these drones, so I assume they're robots, but they look like there could be people in there, but it never
I have
really
no
tells
idea.
us, so.
Yeah, no, it's impossible to know.
However, Lex's Guardians don't notice a woman inside, and Superman shoves them aside to save her. Superman then swirls the fire into the ocean and scolds the Guardians that a woman almost died because of their carelessness. And Lois interviews the saved woman, Miss Vaughn, getting her headline on page 1. He is my angel.
I love the full page that we get of Superman in the middle of the fiery tornado.
Christ imagery there, maybe.
Super Christ imagery. We can do that with Superman. Super Christ imagery. Yes, okay.
Super Christ.
It's inadvertent that my vocabulary has been so corrupted to this point, but yes, extreme notable Christ imagery in that page. But just the coloring on it is gorgeous. The silhouette of Superman.
Very well done.
Superman is the hero wherein the use of Christ imagery doesn't bother me immediately. Like, it's still overplayed and it's still overdone.
Sure.
But he's the one hero who kind of...
He gets a free pass because that's like his whole deal,
that's
right?
His entire deal.
Yeah.
And if you can't do it with Superman, then you can't do it with anyone.
Yes.
I think you can only do it with Superman, but that's, I do think it's wildly out of place in the finale of the Wonder Woman movie, for example, which I just watched again today. And, I still really like that movie, but on a repeat viewing, there's some stuff that doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. You guys.
There's really not.
That while there is some really good, I think, Christ imagery that's acceptable in Superman, I have read a lot of articles that argue against this being from Jewish creators, that Superman really is more of a Moses character.
Oh, that's fair.
Okay, yeah.
Little baby Moses sent down the river to bring freedom to the people, driven by powerful wrath. Of course, while he was created by Jewish creators, he's gone on to be written by many other people, and there has been this Christ imagery that's undeniable.
Yeah. Well, and there is a connection too between the kind of literary and narrative traditions of the Christ figure and those classical heroes of Hercules and of Theseus. Right. The idea of the archetypal hero is kind of encoded into our Christ mythology.
Right. It's like you do that
reciprocally. That's counter.
You do this one specific pose, and everybody gets it. Oh, okay. No, they're okay. Savior, got it. Nailed it.
In the Bible itself, talking about Judaism and how it relates to Christianity, all of the characters in the Old Testament as they relate to Christ are then types of Christ in the Christian religion.
Yes.
So literature-wise, that works out well there too.
Mm-hmm. For all that Superman is not my favorite character, and for all that I remain a Marvel fanboy, this is the piece of art that I want on the wall here in the studio. If I could buy an original page of a comic book, it would definitely be from this.
Later, Lex pays a personal visit to Miss Vaughn, who has become obsessed with Superman, and he offers her a way to help Superman in ways she's only dreamed of.
This chick is crazy.
Yep. Well, you get saved by Superman. That's probably going to be kind of normal. You experience near death, and this man flies in and flies you out. You never know what that's going to feel like.
You're right. I will never know what that's going to feel like.
He basically would become your Buffy.
But I did have a lot of pictures of Buffy up on my walls and stuff when I was growing up. And there are 4 posters of Diana Prince in my office at this moment.
Lois closes out her narration, bringing Perry's 3 rules back up and saying, as long as I believe everything I write, I'll sign my name to it.
It's incredibly strong. I love Lois's narration, and she really works for me as a character through this entire issue. It's kind of a shame that she drops out of the series pretty much at this point. She's not going to be terribly significant. I don't love the introduction of the character that will become known as Toxin. This feels like a really weird... Toxin comes from the 1990s.
Yes.
Like that is a character
She
design.
looked like a 1990s.
Yeah.
This whole comic is almost timeless.
Yes.
Really hinting back toward the origins, but really it does feel timeless until you get to Toxin and you remember this comic was made in the 90s, guys.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, it could just be an homage to what was nice. I mean, that's obviously not what they were trying to do, but that's how you can see it now because then
Her
they're
outfit
in
is
the middle of
terrible.
it. So you can't homage what you're in the middle of.
Exactly right. Yeah, you don't have the necessary perspective, Jeph Loeb. Don't pretend
This
that
is
you
an
do.
homage to 2017. No, 2017 needs a eulogy and it needs to burn.
So now we've reached issue 3, Fall, which starts, this is the gripping story of Superman's dread realization that even his powers are not always enough.
By the way, in the trade, but before each of these stories about the seasons, there's like just this blank page, and then there's this really pretty little like sepia toned illustration of a tree, and then Clark.
I think that's in all of them.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
I think.
Around them, and they have the dog with him. And by this one, I was like, if that dog is not there on the winter one, I'm gonna be friggin'
I
pissed.
did not think
I'm gonna
about
be
that.
so mad if they kill the friggin' dog.
That's the real secret
Yeah.
history of Superman, right
The
there.
dog
I
died.
like that by the winter
The dog
one,
doesn't die. Spoiler alert: the dog is fine.
I guess we can talk about this when we get to the winter one, but by the winter one, the circle around the tree makes it look like a nice snow globe.
Yeah, it
You don't
looks
think
great.
of that
Oh,
until the
that's
last one. It's like,
cool.
oh, it's a snow globe.
Oh.
Anyways, this issue is narrated by Lex Luthor, and there's a quick point I want to touch about, and I'm going to talk about it very quickly because I don't want to take too long on the podcast. In philosophy, Nietzsche had an idea known as the Übermensch, which is usually translated as Superman. This idea is this is the pinnacle of man, all that a human could become. But the idea is that one would cast aside as what we now view as morality, instead seeking only to further oneself in all areas. Lex Luthor generally represents this in the comics, being a genius with great wealth. He has such great power that he worked for, and he has accomplished so much. However, an alien comes to Earth with great powers that he was born with and didn't earn. It has been said that Lex Luthor would be the greatest man on Earth if only it wasn't for Superman.
Yeah.
Superman represents the best of our morality, being as he is often called the Big Blue Boy Scout.
Yeah.
There's a great panel in an old Superman comic where Lex gets Superman powers and Superman becomes merely human. Superman still beats Lex, and in the end, Lex cries out in regret, "I could have saved the world." And Superman delivers the fight-ending punch and replies, "You could have saved the world years ago if it ever mattered to you, Luthor."
Yeah, it's such a great
Woof.
dynamic. Luthor is one of the greatest villains in all of comics history for exactly that reason. He is the hero of his own story. He genuinely believes that he could save the world. And you're right. I mean, he could be Tony Stark easily. He could easily be Tony Stark, if not for the fact that he is driven by jealousy and this philosophical kind of perspective on what human beings are and could become. And the idea of the Übermensch is vital for Lex Luthor, this whole Nietzschean ideal that humans are perfectible, that we can become better, which is predicated on the idea. First of all, Nietzsche had the idea that God is dead, that there is no morality present in the universe that is like enforced upon us. Therefore, we have to decide for ourselves what to do. And the alternative is this kind of Platonic decline into the days of ancient Greece, where we sit around in a drug stupor, just philosophizing with no greater purpose. Luthor here represents perfectly this Nietzschean ideal that no, what you work toward is the improvement of the self.
Right.
And
thus...
Is it bad that Greek thing sounds super good to me?
No, I don't think it is.
All right.
You're going to pick Plato over Nietzsche? Well, okay, I guess. If you really want to.
Listen, there's plenty of other better people to pick over Nietzsche. So.
Like Superman.
Kierkegaard, maybe? This is not the podcast for that discussion. The point being, it's very interesting that this idea of the Superman actually represents Luthor better than it does Superman, who represents really the morality that we carry as people, that really represents this American dream, this good old country boy style of maybe not what we know it to be in 2017, but what it's iconically been in the past of like helping your neighbor out, lending sugar to people, this type of ideology of sacrificing the oneself for the other.
Yeah, Luthor is a fascinating character when handled correctly, when he has that driving influence behind him, when he has that motivation, he works brilliantly.
And that is one thing that this comic doesn't do very well, and I think that it couldn't do very well and still keep its themes properly, is that in a lot of the other comics, Luthor is represented as really, he is just on the verge of being able to be a superhero if he wasn't so obsessed with ending Superman. He's a really strong, well put together, smart man. Here they kind of play him as oafish, a little. They play him for a joke here and there as kind of a dumb guy who's just rich and powerful.
Yeah, they kind of compromise that vision of Luthor. But I mean, the idea in the previous issue that he has created these robotic suits, these robotic sentinels, which, they're all in green and purple, of course, because secondary colors are the hallmarks of your comic book villains. But they go out and take care of the citizens of Metropolis. Like, he would be a hero. He would be a great guy, except that he's so preoccupied. And that's, his great downfall. Yeah. And the downfall of Metropolis, too.
Right. Yeah. That brief introduction and philosophy aside, let's start with the narration here where Lex says this is a love story between him and Metropolis.
I think the narration in this one is my favorite narration of all of them.
It's
a really cool perspective to take it from the villain's side and really get his viewpoint on things, even if you don't agree with it throughout the story.
And we get another great typographic layout here where Luthor talks in all caps. So we had Pa Kent's kind of careful handwriting. It's so handwritten that it looks like comic book lettering, so it doesn't jump out at you in the first issue. Then we get Lois looking like she's typing, which is perfect. Then we get Lex in all caps, and ultimately we'll get Lana in a much more scrawly kind of handwriting, which works perfectly for her character too.
He says, just like any other good love story, there's betrayal, anger, tragedy, and revenge. We see Lex was imprisoned for a night due to some action of Superman. He meets with reporters outside as he leaves, saying that this was just a misunderstanding. And his narration says that the public often needs to be spoken to like children to grasp his position, and that his position is never wrong. He says that the city betrayed him for this so-called Superman. He says self-pity is for lesser men and that he will not be pitied. As he plans his donations and favors and more to cover up what had happened, Superman meets him, and Luthor says, I imagine someone like you doesn't imbibe when offering him a drink. But this word imbibe is interesting to me because it also can mean learn, grasp, or understand. And this is exactly how Lex feels in this moment, that Superman doesn't understand where he's coming from.
Oh.
That's very good. That's very good.
You are so smart. I'm so glad you're on the show with us.
There's something about him using that word that really got me. Like I looked it up to make sure I knew my definition of that well. And I was like, there's something about this word. It's really well done. Lex tells Superman that he built this city and warns that fame is fleeting.
On rock and roll.
It's hard not to, right? It's hard not to. There's no apology needed. It's hard not to. He built the damn city on rock and roll. He definitely did. He built the city on soft jazz, and we all know it. And he warns Superman that fame is fleeting, but Lex Luthor is forever.
Like diamonds.
Yeah, like diamonds. In narration, he tells us some people refer to this time of year as autumn, but that he prefers fall. Just to drive deeper meaning, if it wasn't obvious. This is about seasons, guys, and this is about Superman falling.
Yes.
Yeah, there's going to be a fall here.
Yes.
Not an autumn. There's not going to be an autumn. Superman's not going to experience an autumn. He's going to experience a fall.
Oh, I see. So he trips and falls over. And,
basically.
Okay.
Later, we see Lex checking in on Jenny Vaughn from last issue, who we learn is a gifted biochemist. He has her eyelids held open, watching Superman videos, being brainwashed. He tells her that Superman is going to need her help. And I do have a little bit of a problem with this. She was already obsessed with Superman. She's not strapped down to that chair. Why are her eyelids being held open?
You didn't need to do this. You don't even have to
say, hey, you want to help out Superman? She was be like, yeah, let's do it.
No, I wonder about this because you're right. In the next panel that we get, where we get like the crane shot of her looking at these giant screens, whatever they are, in this weird, retrofuturist technology of Metropolis, she's not strapped down, which makes me wonder if she applied the little bandages, the little stitches that are holding her eyes.
She doesn't even have a guy like doing the vising in her eyes like in A Clockwork Orange. It's a bad plan.
It's pretty terrible. But also we get a throwback here to the live action early black and white Superman show, because we get some of those key lines. Look up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman who can change the course of mighty rivers, bends steel in his bare hands, he fights for truth, justice, and the American way. Look up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. We get this ongoing narration just driving home the point to Jenny that he is the hero.
Right.
This doesn't really work for me. It doesn't really
make sense. I don't know why. I agree with you completely, Vin. She already had like her serial killer like yarn newspaper clipping walls. She didn't need this.
Yeah. It does drive home the villainy of Luthor, and it does creep me out because when I was a little kid, I remember watching a movie maybe, or maybe it was a TV show of some creepy thing where there was a guy who was trying to brainwash these children and he used like toothpicks to hold their eyelids open.
Oh my gosh, I remember that too. What was that from?
I don't know, but it terrified me. And ever since, any kind of imagery like that just really like makes me cringe really bad. Yeah, I can't take it. Anyways, moving on from there, Lois starts to read a letter from Clark to his parents on his desk, but she is caught by Clark. She says that the letter mentions LL and thought it was her, but he says it's Lana Lang. She asks how many people he knows with the initials LL.
And
4. We get a glimpse at Lex's tower at that moment because Lex lived there. 4 is very much so the incorrect answer. There's a lot more.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that this was a quiz.
Hold on. I'm going to list them.
Oh boy.
And these aren't probably all of them. These are just the ones I could find. Laura Vaughn, Lionel Luther, Lena Luther, Lenny Luther, Lucas Luther, Lori Luther, Linda Lee, Linda Lang, Lucy Lane, Lila Laurel, Lori Lamaris, Lenora Lamaris, Luma Lena, Latita, I don't know how you pronounce that.
Letitia?
Lerner, Linda Lake, Leslie Lar, Leary Lee, Lyrica Lloyd, Lola Law, Loop Leo Cadio, and Leslie Luckaby.
What?
Superman number 204 deals with this in a mystery where Superman's only clue to a threat is the initials LL, and there's this wonderful panel which brings up Lori Lamaris, Lana Lang, Luma Linei, Lex Luthor, Lois Lane, Linda Lee, and Lightning Lad, and he says that predictor might be right. Grown all my life. He actually says grown, which is weird. It's not like it's not a sound effect. He just says it, and he says choke to begin with. Choke. All my life, my fate has been weirdly connected with people whose initials are LL. Which is true. Almost everyone that he's ever fallen in love with, LL. Even when he went back in time on Krypton, he fell in love with someone, LL.
Oh, Lord.
Yep.
Lordy Lou.
Lordy Lou. Lois coughs and collapses. The whole office collapses, as a matter of fact, as Lex stares out over the city saying, truth, justice, the American way.
What a bastard.
Yeah. Superman notices that the whole city is passed out, and he stops a train whose operator can no longer control it. Lex says this time his powers won't help. This time, there is no one for him to bully. No crowds to cheer his good intentions. Superman talks to Professor Crosby at Star Labs, who has been in a controlled environment and therefore was unaffected. And funny note, when I looked her up, I found a Wikipedia page and multiple different like comic wikias for Professor Bridget Crosby that said she first appeared created by Loeb in Superman number 158 in the year 2000, which cannot be true because this came out in 98.
Evidently
she's
here.
not mentioned by Bridget, but guys, I'm smarter than the Wikia apparently. I guess it wasn't that hard. Most people don't have faith in Wiki. But I guess this was actually her first appearance since it came out 2 years before. The character has also made appearances in Smallville, the television series portrayed by actress Margot Kidder, who also played Lois Lane in the 1978 Superman film. Professor Crosby suggests that Luthor may be able to help, and Superman pays him a visit. Lex is fine, of course, in a controlled environment in his building. He goads Superman. He says, how do we know that whatever gave Superman his powers, or perhaps maybe an alien origins, just guessing, made him the carrier of the virus and made everyone sick? It's kind of a genius move on Lex's part.
A little bit, except that, his parents never got sick and neither did I mean, I'm assuming his parents got sick, you know what I mean? But just anyway.
I really like this moment where Superman's fists clench and he says, if I were to crash through the glass and drag you out here, how long before some LexCorp employee would appear with an antidote? And then his fist unclenched and his hand opens up and he says, but I can't take that chance. I can't be like you, Luthor. So I'm asking, can you help?
Yeah.
This is what separates them.
Yeah. And Lex even mentions in his narration, he cannot lose faith in himself or he is lost. Lex summons Jenny Vaughn, who is wearing a very over-the-top 90s costume and going by her her quote-unquote superhero name, Toxin. That's clearly a supervillain name.
Right? Good guys aren't called Toxin.
Never. She has come up with a cure, and Superman flies her through the clouds over the city as she releases it, and it rains down on Metropolis. The city awakens. Toxin mentions the scent of the cure as Lois says, poppies. Nice Wizard of Oz reference to the poppy field scene. Lex tells how his abusive father taught him to always give people what they want, but at a price.
That was a really chilling bit of narration, and I think one of the reasons why Lex's narration is my favorite.
Yeah.
Like just this, that whole thing it's terrible and awful and horrible, but excellent narratively.
Yeah. Well, it's a complete contrast to Clark, who grew up in Smallville.
Of course.
With a loving family. Luther grew up probably in the big city with a very abusive father. Luther is the corn that grew up too fast and grew too heavy and was not rooted.
Yeah, and turned sour.
sure.
That's a really good pull. And we should say, too, because we've been talking about the Ubermensch and this idea of the Nietzschean Superman, that good Superman stories never make the mistake of presenting that as an actual philosophy, as an actual theme.
Right.
Lex's philosophy is wrong. It is flawed, and it is shallow, and it is corruptive.
Yes.
Yeah. And here we get to see exactly how that works out.
Yeah.
Most often, I think I even remember reading a panel of Luther where he mentions once, he's like, I could cure cancer if I want. I could. It's easy.
Yeah.
If only I could get Superman out of the way.
Lex Luthor, you're so dumb.
And so there's no like goodness in that. It's like, well, you could do that. You could be more powerful if you just would get over Superman.
Yeah. Just move to Gotham.
Well, that's not going to turn out good for you either. Batman's just
Across
gonna
the bay, apparently.
beat the crap out of you. He's not going to hold as many punches as Superman does. Superman returns toxin to Luthor's building, but her heart has stopped due to overexposure to the virus.
I mean,
weird. She had a mask on.
Yeah,
I don't know.
presumably not, in fact, overexposure to the virus, but some nefarious plan of Luthor's.
Right. I do really like what Lex says to Superman here. They say you can change the course of mighty rivers, but have you so little understanding of how fragile the human condition is, how easily a life can be lost? Being the most powerful man in the world means nothing if you are all alone. No one knows that better than I. Go back to wherever you came from before you fail us all.
It's pretty good villain dialogue. Yeah.
And he's right, is the thing.
Yeah.
Feeling defeated, Clark returns home, telling his ma and pa he may need to stay in Smallville for a while.
Yeah.
As Lex's narration reminds us, this was a love story with betrayal, anger, tragedy, and revenge.
It's
really, really good.
It also speaks to that idea that, one of the reasons that Lex Luthor has never identified Superman's secret identity is that the idea of Superman having a secret identity is a complete anathema to Lex Luthor. He can't envision a man like Superman ever pretending to be someone else.
Right.
Yeah.
So it literally doesn't occur to him that he could be masquerading as a reporter for a local newspaper.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that he gives no reason for anyone to think that there's an alter ego. He just is Superman.
Yeah.
I love that idea of the mythic idea of the Fortress of Solitude being a part of Superman's kind of presentation to the world right from the jump. That's so smart. I love that.
That's where I go when I'm not here saving all of you.
Yep.
Issue 4, Winter, which starts out a hero who must learn that he cannot run away from his problems or his responsibilities. Lana Lang narrates this issue, telling us her childhood hopes to marry Clark and how that was all turned upside down when he revealed his powers to her. Lana and Clark meet back up in Smallville. That kid is back on the ledge again.
On the freaking Trev.
That's how it
Trev.
opens.
Come on, Trev.
We don't know his name yet, but still, geez.
No, this is when we get his name. Now
yes,
pitching
yes.
for Metropolis, Trevor Burbank. Trevor gets a signal, goes into his windup, and the crowd goes wild. And then there's this horrible, gaudy
The Guardian.
Lex
Giant green
Sentinel
robot.
right there.
Go inside,
Guardian.
citizen. Why are you on this ledge out here? Where are your parents?
Stay inside. LexCorp is concerned for your safety. Yep. In the background, there's a really interesting point here where you can see a billboard that was shown in the
Oh, I
previous
love
issue.
that. Yeah.
It said, "Welcome to Metropolis, home of Superman," but it's being replaced by 2 little helicopters to say LexCorp, there for you, ... always.
That's not ominous.
The marketing department of LexCorp not well staffed. It turns out not really
It's just
well
Luther.
staffed.
He's like, I will say what it says. No, that's actually not a good idea. He's like, you're fired.
Oh, okay.
So you're saying there's a real Lex Luthor Twitter account out there that
Yeah.
Okay.
It really is. It really is. I'm talking to gritted teeth.
Do we have a note here about that time that Lex Luthor became president of the United States?
That did happen.
What?
That did happen. Yes.
His running mate was Pete.
His running mate was Pete. You're
And then when something, I don't remember what happened to Luther, but something happened to Luther, and then Pete became president.
Yeah, little Pete Ross. How far he's come. We have so many comics to read.
Yeah.
We have so many, and we'll never read that one.
We'll never get to that.
Comics are bonkers.
They sure are. Getting back to this comic, Lex overlooks the city with his guardians flying around, glad to see no sight of Superman. At the Daily Planet, Lois wonders at the coincidence of Clark taking personal time off just as Superman disappears, but then decides that the idea that Clark could be Superman is the stupidest idea in the world. Maybe you should trust your instinct sometime there.
Aren't you a reporter?
Which I like that while she's thinking of it, it has her paper behind her. It's like Lois Lane, award-winning reporter,
Yes.
like behind her. It's like, yeah, she's actually right about this. She
With
just
the
doesn't trust
headline,
herself.
"It flies." Which,
It flies.
it flies. I mean, it's framed, so presumably that was her award-winning expose on Superman. That was the first story that was written. But yeah, "It flies." That was your first
That was
draft, I assume.
Where is your copy editor?
Yeah. No. Lana and Clark hang out in Smallville, walking to the general store to meet Pete. Lana comments on the bar elephant and how Pete never made his million. And Pete says, I just really like this bit of dialogue. "When I was a child, I behaved as a child. Now it's time to put away childish things." And what'll that leave you with? Clark learns that one of the old men in the continual card game at the store passed away.
Yeah.
Pete shows his aggravation that Lana and Clark left Smallville like he always wanted to, but for some reason that he can't understand, they decided to come back. Clark hangs his head.
Pete's kind of a dick.
Well, I kind of get it. He's that kid who just never really got to experience his dreams. He has friends who all got to go live their lives and experience their dreams. They come back and he's like, why would you come back to this?
No, he's still being a dick.
I can see that. Clark hangs his head as Pete says, "You can't even see how wrong that is." Lana narrates how hard it was for her to find out Clark's secret, for her dreams crumble down, and how she ran away. Lana has dinner with the Kents, and this is a great moment where she talks about just what it was like growing up there, like the way that the doors closed and everything, that memories of a sweet, gentle couple who raised a boy the best they could. And Ma says, "Hasn't Lana turned into a fine young woman, Jonathan?" He says, "I only have eyes for you, dear."
It's so cute.
Cute little old couple.
I love little old couples in love.
They're warned by the police chief of a flood coming to the town, and Lana reveals to Ma and Pa that she knows Clark is Superman. She says in the narration that the whole world is resting on his shoulders and that maybe they weren't big enough to carry that load. Clark confides in Pa that he had thought he could do anything and that he learned that he couldn't. Pa encourages him that only over time did he become a good farmer, through good and bad seasons, over time. Ma and Lana talk about Clark, and Ma tells her that even with the cape and the big S on his chest, he's still our Clark.
Yeah, this is after we get the third of our panels of Clark in that pose in his room on his bed. It's it's
That's
really,
such
really
a sweet
good.
moment when he's talking to Pa there.
How do you guys feel about the S symbol? Do you like it as an element of his costume design? Do you like it more because it stands for Superman, or do you like it more because it is the symbol of the House of El from ancient
It
Krypton?
stands for
It stands for
Superman.
for
It
hope.
stands for
I've
Super. S
never
is for
really liked it.
Superman.
It's a symbol. It's an S.
It's an S. Thank you, Amy Adams. God, she's my favorite part of that movie.
Yeah. Well, second.
What's your first favorite part of that movie? Oh, wait, Batman versus... Yeah, Wonder Woman. Sorry, I forgot. Jeez.
Yikes.
I'm sorry, Gal. Forgive me.
I like the symbol. I think it works well. I think Superman might look silly without the symbol even. Just because it's so iconic. It's really embedded. I think if it wasn't so iconic, I could maybe see how it would be silly, but it's too iconic for me.
Yeah, at this point, it's
too
just...
embedded for me to not like it.
Yeah.
The Kents and Lana pack the truck to head to the church for safety, and Lana talks to Clark. She says, "Are you going to be all right?" And he says, "I'm the one that usually asks that." And she says, "You didn't answer the question." He says, "You take care, Lana."
I have a question. Why is Superman in his Superman outfit wearing a raincoat over his Superman outfit?
Doesn't want it to get
he's
wet.
in Smallville,
He does
too.
have
I
a
mean,
secret
he's-
identity too. He shouldn't be just
His
standing
coat
outside
is
the
wide
farm.
open.
But he's looking toward the house.
No, you're doing a bad job, Clark.
I don't have the answers for these questions. But then there's this great dialogue, this pep talk that he really needed. "Clark, I don't know what it's like to bend steel in my bare hands or run faster than a speeding bullet, but I do know what it's like to have my whole life planned out ahead of me and then have it yanked out from under me." And he goes, "Lana," and she says, "Just shut up and listen. You may be able to do things nobody else can do, but that doesn't make it any less hard to be who you want to be. And in case you're wondering, the boy I grew up with who was so noble and caring, he's still inside that costume today. Go make things safe, Superman." And she kisses him.
I love this for all the reasons that I previously stated.
Is that
For all
his
the
second
reasons.
ever kiss, do you think? Has he kissed anybody except Lana Lang at this point in this story?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Him and
Yeah.
Lois are
Yes.
not in any kind of like good talking point.
Fair point. Just your first kiss since
Superman's
1945.
still a bit aloof to her, so.
Yeah.
And then Superman flies by the old card players floating through Smallville on a boat, which I really enjoy.
I want their story.
There's a great moment there. I don't think I put it in my notes. Do you have it there, Alistair? I love the dialogue that they say about hope.
Yeah, so we opened the page with this dialogue. Bert, Morris, I'm telling you fellas, this is hopeless. Hopeless. Oh, I don't know, Tom. I see hope as he looks up and sees Superman. That's yep. It's just, it's so good. This is exactly what Superman should be. He should be a symbol, you know?
Right,
There's
exactly.
this great panel from, gosh, I don't even remember where it is in Superman continuity, but there's a story where Superman believes that he is dying and he goes and says farewell to everyone that he should say farewell to. And then he flies up above the clouds above Metropolis into the night sky so that he can see the moon. No one else on the ground can see it. And using his heat vision, he inscribes upon the surface of the moon, do good unto others and every man can be a Superman. Signed Superman, brackets, Clark Kent, close brackets, on the surface of the moon. But that's the thing. It's so goofy. It's so stupid, but it absolutely speaks to the heart of the character.
Exactly.
That is his
exactly
superpower, is just caring more.
I know of that Superman comic. It's just one of the numerical ones. It's not like a special one-off or anything, only because of the War Rocket Ajax podcast.
Yes,
because they listed
I
it
think
as
that's
one
where
of
I first heard it,
comics that must be read, like one of the top best comics ever.
I think when they were doing their, I don't even remember the name of the segment that they were doing, but they were ranking the best lines from comics.
Yeah.
And that was very near the top. That was pretty good. That's War Rocket Ajax with Chris Sims and Matt D. Wilson, not the colorist. There you go.
It's pretty good podcast. Guys. Lana narrates that wherever in the world she went, people talked about Superman, and that they always wondered why a guy with powers like that would use them to help others and not for their own benefit.
Yeah.
That like bums me out so bad. Like, I mean, I don't know. I guess like within the fiction of superhero worlds, you don't really have superheroes unless they're like within the fiction, like real people who are being heroes. But I mean, like if we heard about somebody who was just going around doing good, I feel like myself and most of the people that I know, our first question wouldn't be, why are they doing that and not helping themselves? We'd be like, yeah, hell yeah, do good, do more good.
But this is the
Have you seen
counterpoint.
2017?
Listen, I'm trying
It's happening
really.
all around you right now.
No.
This is the counterpoint, though, to Lois's argument earlier, where she made exactly the same point and found it baffling. She's still confused
Right.
and doesn't understand it. But of course, then we get the last line from Lana, because she says, who would use them for others and not for their own benefit. And I found myself smiling.
Yeah, because she knows why.
Because she knows. She knows exactly
I like
why.
that narration happens while Superman is moving large objects to create a dam to stop the water flowing and stop the flooding, as she finishes off saying, and I find myself smiling because it's exactly what he's doing. That's just who he is. He's the guy who saved Smallville. He was the one who's deeply rooted in that small town life, raised by this loving couple who gave him an amazing moral compass.
I think there is a slight kind of thematic problem with the last movement of this story, in that Superman himself is never threatened. Superman is never having to really exert himself. We are about to endanger the Kents, which we'll do pretty frequently in Superman stories, just for that, emotional impact. But here, there's no sense that Superman isn't going to do everything that he sets out to do, because you guys, he's Superman.
Yeah.
So it would be nice if it cost him something. It would be nice if he had to do the thing that Superman has to do. When you really want to tighten the screws on Superman, you just make him make a choice.
Yeah.
You get him up. I mean, this isn't a Superman beat, but you get him up on the top of the Brooklyn Bridge with a bus full of orphans and, Mary Jane dangling from the other side, and he can save one. That's what you do to hurt Superman.
You say the bus full of orphans, by the way, that the life counter is higher there. There are more people to be saved versus the one person.
Yeah, but Mary Jane.
Listen,
Yeah, but Gwen Stacy.
Hold on. I've read enough comics to know you do both.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but sometimes when
You
you're on
call
top of a
Tony
bridge,
Stark, he zooms in and grabs MJ.
Life finds a way.
you Goldblum that good.
Listen, here are the options, though. I think this really goes to show that the true kryptonite for Superman is the people around him.
Yes.
That's really where it comes from. But we could have had that Superman actually fight someone in this that was like cosmically powered that could actually hurt Superman, but then he'd have to die, come back with a mullet. We don't want that.
No one wants that.
We don't want that.
No one wants
We're not going to cover that comic.
How did he even cut his hair into a mullet? Oh, wait, lasers. I forgot.
Lasers. Extreme,
Can you imagine?
Extreme 90s lasers.
Can you imagine taking the time? I mean, like, you cut your hair into a mullet, that takes you, what, 5-10 minutes? But, like, to precision laser your own hair into a mullet, you gotta really want it.
I do have to stick up for his hair here, and I only do this because my dad had the same haircut. It's not really a mullet because it's just long hair pushed back behind your ears.
Oh, that's not a mullet.
It doesn't look like he's not. There's no shaved sides. There's no short sides. It's just literally pushed all back behind his ears. Which is how my dad would always wear his hair, and people would be like, "Your dad had a mullet," and I was like, "Well, it's not. It's
really.
not. It's not business in the front.
Yeah.
It's just combing.
It's no business. It's just all part.
Combed it right back to the party.
Which is very 90s, but it's not the same. Moving on. The Kent's truck almost falls into a river when a bridge collapses from rushing water.
I thought the dog was going to die.
I did too.
Fair.
Pa and their pup fall into the water, but Clark saves the truck with Lana and Ma. He finds Pa and pulls him out, saving him. Lana's narration talks about the people who do good, nurses, police, pastors, parents, and compares them to what Superman does. Choosing not only to do good, but to inspire others to do good.
Yeah.
That comment of there are heroes everywhere around us.
Yeah.
Isn't that actually like kind of you touched on? So that there are people doing good everywhere, making these choices. And then Superman even finds their old dog Shelby, and I breathed the biggest sigh of relief.
Me too. I did not want the dog to die.
Dancing on this little island. It's great. Her island. I guess it's Shelby. I don't know.
Yeah, she's a girl dog.
And then I really like the narration here as he's playing with the dog. I finally realized while I was away how special it made me feel, because to understand that man in the cape who could fly, all I needed to know was Clark.
Yeah.
Afterwards, the local pastor addresses everyone outside the church, saying how fortunate they are Superman was around because no one lost their lives in the flood. He talks about how the hardships bring rewards, that in times of crisis we are defined by how we act, how the tree that wilts in the winter becomes that much stronger in the spring for having gone through it, how through the passage of seasons we can appreciate the future. Alana narrates that she found out that she never really left Smallville. It was a part of who she was and always will be. And that Clark is the same.
Yeah.
Would you say that you can take the girl out of Smallville, but you can't take the Smallville out of the girl?
Nor out of the Superman.
Nor out of the Superman.
No.
Yeah. And then there's this really cool scene where it shows Superman flying off from Smallville, flying back into Metropolis. The narration says, when Clark flew off to the city, I knew that we wouldn't see each other for a while. He had gone back to the rest of the world and to that never-ending idea of using his powers to help as many people as he could.
Yeah.
Which I think is her acknowledgement that she can't have Superman to herself. Mm-hmm. She's letting him go there. Yeah. There's a beautiful spread of him flying back to Metropolis, by the way.
I love it.
That streak of him through the sky.
I love the way they handled that flight effect throughout this book, that kind of rainbow effect as he flies. It could look very cheesy, but it just looks fantastic.
It looks amazing.
Yeah. Clark brings back a page one story about Superman saving Smallville from the flood, the Daily Planet annoying the hell out of Lois.
Yeah.
How did she not put it together?
That's kind of shady as well.
It is a little shady.
Yeah.
Wait, you went back to Kansas? And Superman was in Kansas?
But also, he saved a bunch of people. He did what was right. He's living up to his heritage here from Smallville. But also, when he returns to work, he's super going to write a story about what he did on his summer vacation.
That's right.
You know, if Daniel Sousa were in charge of this, he would have drawn glasses on Superman's face by now.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, Suspin.
Also, that smug little grin that Clark has in the splash page there. I don't know, Lois. Just looking, I guess.
Shut up, Clark.
Like fixing his tie in that panel, too. It's so good. And then we go to that dang kid on the edge of a building again. And this time, one of Lex's guardians spooks him off the edge. Superman catches the kid and tells the guardian to inform Lex that he's returned. Lex angrily watches from his tower, which is a great scene. He's got his glass in his hand, just staring out at the whole thing happening. Superman remembers the kid, who introduces himself as Trev, and Superman says, "Folks call me Superman," as he flies away.
Folks call me Superman. That's how folksy Clark Kent is.
Yep.
Oh, them folks, they just call me Superman.
Lana says she's going to settle down in Smallville and maybe give Pete a call, which in the
Don't marry Pete.
Well, in the comics, Lana eventually marries Pete, and they have a son that they name Clark.
Yay! Clark Superman Ross. Wait, does that give it away? We probably shouldn't call him.
Nah, no one will know this.
Oh, how you named your son after your two favorite men who are completely dissimilar in every way. Huh, that's so cute.
And that's Superman
That's
for all
it.
seasons.
That's it.
Yeah.
Sarah, what do you think of this book?
I quite enjoyed it. I think that the storytelling is really, really strong. I loved the narration all throughout, and again, I loved the big, just like the huge like 2-panel spreads or the 2-page spreads where we would just have like this amazing art in the background. Loved all that. Again, not a huge fan of some of the face work every now and then. I'm just like, oh, it's a little goofy, but I mean, I've seen worse. I've seen better, but overall, I quite enjoyed it. And I think that this is the first Superman comic I've ever read
just
ever.
about to ask you that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this was really good. No, I think that this is good. I mean, it's going to be hard to top this. This was a wonderful, excellent, like introduction to Superman comics.
Well, because Superman is so iconic and because we understand this character pretty well just through, the osmosis of regular pop culture.
Right.
Are you interested in reading more stories, or do you feel like, well, I've got me my Superman. That's all
I think I might have me. I mean, unless you guys can sway me on another one that's like this good.
Yeah.
I think I might be good.
I have a couple more that are just as good, but the problem is they're a little bit longer, so they're harder to cover
it's
on
tough.
the podcast.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to do All Star. It'd be really good.
Or
Yeah.
Birthright.
Or Birthright. It'd be interesting to look at a different take on Superman, to do, Alan
Red
Moore's
Sun.
Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, and, the kind of definitive hatchet job of Superman that is.
Right.
But it'd be, there are other Superman stories that do more than this. And I think it would actually be fascinating to go back and read, Death of Superman to get that, whatever the slimmest possible trade is that you can find in that story. That would be really interesting because you missed out on early 90s
I sure
extreme
did.
comics.
Yeah.
So if we're going to do that, I'm still going to argue that we should do the Executioner's song from X-Men.
Yes, please. I'd much rather.
I don't know what. I mean, you guys are just saying a lot of words, and I don't know what they mean.
So come back for Excelsior issue 63, where we finally talk about some 90s X-Men comics.
Yeah, 63. It should be noted that this is not the end of this story world, I should say, because the way the DC Comics tells, this is kind of its own little world for Superman. This they've returned to the story 3 times since this series ended. First in the short story from Superman Batman Secret Files and Origins 2003, titled When Clark Met Bruce, depicting the first meeting of this Clark Kent meeting Bruce Wayne.
That would be the best rom-com ever. Ever.
But I like that they actually meet as young boys in Smallville.
What?
Yeah, I've never read it, but
No, I've never read it.
We should check it
that does not sound promising to me, but if anyone can do it, these guys can do it.
Solo number 1 featured Prom Night, which depicted Clark picking up Lana Lang as his prom date. And finally, a short story in Superman Batman 26 titled Sam's Story, where Superman recounts his friend from high school who died of cancer when he was very young.
Yes.
The Sam character is actually based on Jeph Loeb's son, Sam, who died from the same illness. That comic is really rough. I've never read it, but I listened to a podcast where people talked about it a while back, and they were talking about how it really does touch on kind of what it does with Toxin here, where Superman, you can't punch illness.
Yeah.
And so Superman, this kid is like on crutches and something's going on. I know Clark's like really, his friend is like, hey, is everything okay? And he's like, yeah, I just hurt myself playing soccer. And obviously Clark knows that you don't play soccer. You're this wimpy kid. And he uses his x-ray vision and sees there's a mass in his legs because he has bone cancer. And Clark's just like, how do I deal with this? I can't help him.
Yeah.
So I can see Loeb really doing a good job telling that story, because as a parent, like, how do you deal with that? I can't help my child.
It's that powerlessness. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Which kind of ties back to, I think, what is one of those quintessential criticisms of Superman, that, gosh, he's just really patriarchal, right? Like he is the patriarchy flying around the skies of Metropolis. And, that kind of patriarchal influence can be negative, but also positive. Like he is genuinely caring and wants to help and is willing to sacrifice, whatever he has to help. And I can imagine that being a really tough book. I've got to say, for all the great things that I've heard about that book, it is nowhere near the top of my to be read list. I would have to be in a very particular place.
That's I have medical phobias and I'm terribly, terribly afraid of cancer.
Yeah. Hey, Sarah, what are we doing next time here on Excelsior? He said, segueing out of that as fast as humanly possible.
So next month we're doing something really interesting because it is the month of October, and it is the spooky.
I'm sorry. Do you mean October?
I do mean that.
October. Can we trust it? Oktoberfest. Can we trust it?
It's the spookiest month of the year. And we've decided that every week here on Excelsior during the month of October, we are going to be doing something Batman related.
Batman.
I'm really excited.
I'm Batman.
Oh no.
I am Bane, actually. He talks like this, just like me, because I am Bane.
I'm Robin from the Lego Batman movie.
Well, no arguments here. I see no lies.
Next time on the show, we are doing the Lego Batman movie, which I'm super duper excited about.
Why wouldn't you start with the Lego Batman movie if you're talking about
Batman?
Batman?
So good, yes.
The Batman.
So that's what's going to be happening. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be great.
I'm very excited.
Can't wait. It's a really great movie. It's a legitimately great movie.
Legitimately
and
a very good
legitimately
movie.
great take on Batman.
Yeah.
I have been very excited to talk about this movie since it came out. So I'm glad that we're doing a Batmonth and we can start off with that. That's a fun one before we get to like some darker Batman stuff.
Yes, we're definitely going to delve into his entire canon and look at some much more horrifying stories. But yes.
Oh boy.
Next week, all will be sweetness and light and bright colors and Sauron teaming up with Voldemort at the end. Which, you guys, minor spoilers for the Lego Batman movie, I suppose. But everyone in the world has seen it. So
it's true.
If you haven't yet seen it, go watch it.
What are you doing?
Properly
it's
great.
So good.
It is properly great.
Worth the $3 to rent on Amazon. Seriously.
And that'll do it, I think, for this week.
I think so. Yeah. So if you guys enjoyed the show, if you want to help us make more of this show and just help us with what we're doing here, you can do that by going to patreon.com/commonroomradio, where you can kick us $1 a month or whatever you can afford. If you do that, you'll get a postcard from Common Room Radio and also get access to our gag reels, which are hilarious.
They are.
Yeah.
You can get in touch with us over on Twitter and tell us what you think about this Superman comic and the Lego Batman movie and anything else that we've ever talked about. You can find us at Excelsior Cast. You can find me at Elsa Grab the Salt.
I'm at Paper Bullets.
And I'm at Flesh Eater. And come play with me, guys. Come talk comics with me. I want to talk comics with you. I want to know your opinions. Come play with me.
Come play with me in
come
the
play with me in this space I have.
Come to my playhouse.
Anyone who doesn't listen to McElroy podcast, very confused right now.
It's possible they tuned out long ago. Oh, and we should say too, because I don't think we've ever mentioned this on a podcast, you guys, we have a P.O. box.
That's right.
You can send us real life mail here in Oklahoma City. Send it to Common Room Radio, P.O. Box 36092, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma 73136. And we check that every couple of weeks. So if there's a comic that you'd really like us to read, mail us a comic.
Mail us a comic.
Mail us some snacks that we can eat during the podcast.
Yes, please. I'm chewing on ice right now. We desperately need
Because
snacks.
audio quality goes out of the window when it's hot in the recording studio, as it always is.
If you want us to talk about you on the podcast, send us things and we'll talk about you.
We sure will. We'll say nice things about you.
That's right. And remember, as always, to leave a rating and review on iTunes. This really helps us out, makes us feel good about ourselves, and lets other people see that we're a podcast that they can listen to.
That's right. Yes. So I think that's going to do it for us this week. Again, next week we're doing the Lego Batman movie, so we will see you then. Until then, from Common Room Radio, I'm Sarah K. Bazant.
I'm Alistair Stevens.
And folks call me Superman.
Excelsior!